Hello.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Good. Is that all real behind you, or is that just
Yes.
your?
No, it's really, really my stuff.
Wow.
You
Very
know,
nice.
I have some
Very nice.
fun stuff.
Wow. You got a lot of stuff there.
It's like, I like your hat too,
Thank you. Thank you.
and real books
Yeah, those are real books. Yes. Yes. I've replaced all that gear with this stuff back
with
here.
this stuff. Total replacement? Really? You don't play with your tape recorder anymore, or?
Well, I don't know if you can see. I got my microphone over there,
Yeah, I got one above my head.
and I got my I got a couple of little tiny pieces of equipment,
Yeah,
but
but I bet you still admire and hear music in ways that only professionals like yourself could hear it.
I think so, and I'm amazed that the older I get, the deeper I get it. So that's rewarding about life, right?
The meaning behind it, the sound, the deeper meaning behind the recording, you mean?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. I love playing other people's songs because it's a way of entering their consciousness. You know, what was
And
Stevie Wonder thinking? Like I get what he's thinking when I play his chords.
when you get in there and play the keys yourself.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, God, he's a great one to do that with too.
Right, right,
I mean, harmony is so delicious that way.
right,
It's like I could live inside a chord. I
right.
think it sounds so great, and the frequencies and the energy of it. I feel like, is this the universal energy around me? That's what this feels like. It's so much bigger than me, and the chords are so much more delicious than
Yes,
it's
yes.
just the root, third, fifth, seventh of this.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I loved when I was working on music, and I experience it now with writing and the work that I do, is that, the deeper you go into something, the longer you work on it. I would always say like the space between the notes gets bigger and bigger and bigger. The perception goes, it's infinite how deep you can go into that.
And how important those spaces are.
Yes.
Because
Right.
when we're learning instruments, we think playing the notes are the most important thing, but the shape of it is because of where you leave the space.
Right. Right. Exactly.
That's so
Exactly.
funny. I
So,
really noticed that with picking on guitar, it's such a short distance when you rest.
mm,
But when I was playing drums, I was like that distance from lifting the stick up and coming back down, the rebound was
mm.
just fascinating.
So you teach at Berkeley. I know that you're supposed to be interviewing me, but I have to interview you for a couple of minutes.
I would love that.
So what do you teach?
I teach guitar there.
Ah,
And in those lessons, there's a lot of recording and songwriting and creativity and just staying sane as an artist.
right, absolutely. How long have you been at Berkeley?
Since 1984.
Oh,
Yeah, it's nearly 40 years.
wow, that's amazing.
And I went there and graduated from there. And there was two
Oh,
years in between teaching, and I wanted to go there since I was 11 years old. So
wow,
it's like
you
kind of
did it.
check.
You did it, and you're there. That's fantastic. Yeah, so you probably know all the people that I know at Berkeley. I don't know. So you talked to Rob.
Yeah, I didn't realize you guys knew each other. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah. And do you know Leanne Unger?
Oh, sure.
She's my ex-sister-in-law.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's
So
fantastic.
yeah. And oh my goodness. And Matt Glazer. Do you know Matt?
Sure.
Right. Fiddle player. We worked on projects together when I lived up in Massachusetts for a couple of years.
Oh, that's so cool. Is that when
And
you were working at Blue Jay?
yeah, 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 that's right.
Wow. So you were still engineering when you left New York, came up, did some work at Blue Jay.
Yeah, yeah, I helped Bob and Janet really get that studio going. I brought the sort of the whole New York ethos and way of working to them because they didn't know what they were doing really. And
No wonder that place became so cool.
I can take a little bit of credit for that. And they had a reunion when the place closed a couple of years ago, and it was really very moving and rewarding the legacy, you must have that, having been teaching for 40 years, the people who come to you who say, I learned from so and so who learned from you, and you don't even know, right? You don't even know how that gets paid forward, and the influence that you've had.
It's
Right.
true.
So it was great to actually meet some of those people. Who
That's
said, oh,
awesome.
I knew, I learned from Rob, who, learned from you,
That's so great.
and that was really
Wow.
that was nice.
I
And
wish
I'm
I'd met you then.
probably better that you didn't,
You would say you're a much better person now?
without question.
Without question. That's a very interesting thing. I was just watching the video on your website with Victor, to overestimate humans. What a beautiful thing. I mean, just as we're popping on here, I'm trying not to cry because that video was so great.
So moving, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yep. I try to overestimate all the humans that I work with, as I'm sure you must do too.
Expect the best and they'll hit higher than what you expected, and
Right.
that's just beautiful. It's totally beautiful.
Yeah.
And your book is fantastic.
Thank you so
That's
much.
how I found out about you. I read your book just recently, and
Uh-huh.
it just blew my mind because there's just like confirmation after confirmation that life can work out in so many different ways. And in some ways, it's much better that it did what it did.
Exactly. You might not know it at the time, but
Yeah,
so,
it
yeah.
feels different, but Never Say No to a Rock Star is the book we're talking about. And
Yes.
gosh, when did you realize I actually do have to really write this? What was some of those deciding factors
In
writing the book?
when so um through the years, sometimes people would ask me questions, and I was always kind of embarrassed to talk about it. It seemed like name dropping, like
Hmm.
with Bob Dylan or whatever it was. And but I was always writing about different things, and I would always say to my current wife, who didn't know me when I was in the music business, I would say, I was a major cat. And she would say, no, you weren't. I'd say, no, I was. And so I had to
Sure
provide some
were.
evidence for that, right? So I decided to write the story of working on Blood on the Tracks with Dylan, because I was the only person alive, I think. Oh no, Phil Ramone was still alive at that point. So I was one of two people alive who were present for all the New York sessions of the recording of Blood on the Tracks. And I thought that it was, I had some interesting stories to tell. So I wrote that as a blog post, and it exploded.
Oh, nice.
I didn't realize that there are a lot of Dylan freaks out there who want every detail and every piece of information about anything that Dylan has ever done. And so it just blew up, and
Cool.
and lots of people started writing me and saying, "Where's the book? Where's the book? You got to write the book." So I thought, okay, I got to write the book, and that sent me on that long journey. Also, I did have that experience at the beginning of the book that really did set me off in a way on that journey, where I was working with a client, and he brought in, he asked if we could listen to a piece of music together, because he was having trouble contacting his emotional life. And of course, I agreed. And the song that he chose to play was "Bridge Over Troubled Waters" with the Aretha Franklin version. And it was such an emotional experience for me. This is supposed to be for him, but it triggered something in me, and triggered a whole set of memories about when I worked with Paul Simon 40 years before that.
Wow.
And I had, my old reel-to-reel tapes up in the attic, and the old reel-to-reel tape recorder, and I just felt compelled to bring that down and listen to that old Paul Simon tape that I had, and suddenly all these memories started coming back.
Wow.
And I had this experience, and this is, I think, one of my intentions in writing the book, is this experience of the sort of the dual existence that we lead. I was a dad of little kids, living in the suburbs, being a psychotherapist. But in my mind, there was all of that experience that I had of being in the music world decades before that only existed in my head. So I
Mm,
could be in those two places at once. And that was one of the things that I really wanted to try to convey in the book, how we have our internal solo experience
mm.
while we're living in a world with other people, and how they overlap.
That's so cool.
So once those memories started coming back, I felt compelled to get them down on paper before I forgot all of it.
Yeah. So then, in your creative process for getting that book together, did you have journals to reference as well? Or did you take it purely by memory and did you write on a regular basis, regular schedule? How did you make that happen?
Yeah, if I when I saw Rob a couple of years ago at the Blue Jay reunion, he showed me that he had a book of every session he was ever in, including our first session together. And that's really one of my main regrets, is that I did not journal
Hmm.
while I was working in the studio. I didn't recognize. I was, young and stupid, and I didn't recognize the sort of the historical value of what I was experiencing.
We were also exhausted too.
And yeah, I
I
was
mean,
working 20 hours a day.
when
Right,
would you have the time or the
right,
clarity to, if
right,
you can have any time at all, it'd be like you'd want to be horizontal.
right, exactly. There were daily schedules. I could have kept the daily schedules to at least know when things happened. And also if anybody can remember the world before smartphones, you didn't bring a camera into the studio.
Right.
But I still wish that at the end of every project, I would have said, "Can I have one picture?" I did work hard and long with you, and I didn't do that either. So I really had um, no reference
Yeah.
materials except my memory. And what I discovered in the writing of the book is that my memory is not necessarily completely accurate, but it's my version of events.
Well, how it all made you feel is most important anyway, because that's how you lived it and reacted to it. And
Exactly, exactly.
yeah.
And because I think, I'm sure it's partially who I am, and what does that mean anyway? But the discipline that I learned in the studio, the discipline that I learned from working with people like Phil Ramone, the discipline that I got to observe working with people like Paul Simon or Steely Dan, somehow I have um, integrated. And so writing, I really used what I learned from those people as an inspiration in how to approach the book. So I did write on a regular basis. I wrote whenever I could. With little kids, I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, go to Starbucks and write for 3 hours, because that was the time that I had. If a client canceled a session, I wrote. And I recognized it was going to take longer than it would
Mm,
have taken if I was just doing that all the time, but I accepted that and I did a little bit all the time. And I wanted to, once in my life, take a creative project to my personal limit.
mm.
So whatever anybody thinks of the book, or however it compares to anything else, I don't pretend to be uh the great writer, but I wrote the best book that I could write,
Right.
down to the last comma. And that was the real sense of achievement, and that was where I used the inspiration of the people that I worked with, like a Steely Dan, who there was not a cymbal crash that wasn't deliberate, intentional, and they would work on those, whatever they were working on, until it was as great as they could make it.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And how much time was that then between first starting it and having that first draft done?
Um, I probably worked on it for about 5 years, I think.
Wow.
The first draft, I don't know, that was, but I mean, there were so many drafts
Yeah.
that I don't even know when I couldn't
Was
tell you when the first draft was done.
was there Scrivener or one of those software programs back then to hold on to all these fragments to help you put it together, or was it all just in a word processor?
All just Microsoft Word, all
Yeah,
Word. Yeah,
nice.
lots of files.
And then how many drafts or how many iterations?
Oh, endless number of iterations. I mean, down to um the last uh working with the publisher, getting their input, and down to the final um line editing, to the day before we submitted it to Amazon. I was still editing it.
Wow.
So, what do they say? It's never done. You just have to let it go at a certain point,
You say that about everything.
right?
Bless it, kiss it goodbye, it's done.
Right. Right.
So did you go about finding a publisher?
So, and I think that this is a message I'd like to give everybody out there who aspires to do anything creative or write a book, or I'm very proud of my rejection file. I have many rejections, and I kept because I'm an older guy. I'm an unknown author, uh, and I wasn't writing the new Twilight or Harry Potter or something. So, uh,
Hmm.
in, in the publishing world, especially today, it's very hard. But I kept pursuing it, and then I pretty much exhausted all the opportunities that I could find. And then I discovered that this independent publisher had a contest where he was looking for a manuscript that was music and literature.
Oh, wow.
That was me.
Where was he?
So he was in where is he in Arizona,
Nice.
Schaffner Press,
Right.
and he had a brother who was one of the biggest collectors of Beatles memorabilia, who died young of AIDS, and so in honor of his brother, he created this contest. Where
Hmm.
every year you would put out a book, music and literature. So you'd get a book deal, you'd get a small advance, and everything that came along with that. And I submitted for that, and I won that contest.
Wow.
And that was I was ready to publish on my own until that happened.
Mhm.
And he turned out to be a lovely guy,
Fantastic.
and it was a pleasure to work with him on finishing up the book. And they did a great job putting it out and promoting it to the extent that they could. So that was a really rewarding and lovely experience.
I'm so glad they did. I mean, the book is been so entertaining to me and so fantastic and laugh out loud funny and then just what? And oh, it's
Right.
like I'm 63. I always wanted to study under Phil Ramone, and then I went, you know,
Right.
okay.
Right.
Maybe the stars were actually looking out for me, like,
Indeed. Indeed. Better to encounter him in another context.
yeah, like when I did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
He could be a lovely person. He was incredible with artists. He really created an environment for artists that made them feel so special that they were able to create uh,
Hmm.
in extraordinary ways. That's so important, and so important in terms of I don't know if he understood from a psychological and certainly from a a neuropsych point of view what he was doing when he was working with artists. I think he did it intuitively, and he was an artist, a very sensitive artist himself. So I think he understood what artists needed in
Mm,
order to create. But he was able to do that and brought out the best in artists. Uh,
mm.
but then he would turn to me, and he treated the people in my role very differently.
Yeah. And then, yet in his book I was just reading, made it seem like you were supposed to treat everybody that way. Nice, respect and all that. And I thought, did he change? Did you ever hear that his reputation changed, or that he finally got it, or was he just kind of brushing over the fact that he really wasn't that way to everybody?
So I am friends with the author of that book, who Phil wrote it with.
Oh, okay.
And basically Phil was not willing to, that was a very airbrushed version,
Okay.
because that was all that Phil was willing to allow in
It's
that
almost
book.
like everybody whoever knew him or talked to him all signed an NDA or something, because I've never heard anybody say anything negative
Yeah,
about it. It
yeah.
was always like, oh, Phil Ramone.
It's an interesting thing that when I wrote the book, I was conflicted about how much to reveal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because there was kind of an ethos at that time of, what happens in the studio stays in the studio.
Mm.
Um, and I knew that some people would get upset, but I also wanted to write an honest book.
Yeah.
And I wanted to write something that revealed something more complex, something that was complex, because he's not clearly, he, like any, and like great human beings, I would consider him to be a great man. uh they're complex people.
Mm.
I did two conferences, at the Creativity and Madness conference, and the second one was, do you have to be a jerk to be a genius? And the number of people who fit into that category is legendary.
Mm-hmm.
Subsequent to me writing the book, the whole Me Too movement happened, and it became far more acceptable to
Mm.
reveal this other side of creative people.
Okay.
So it's kind of ironic that I would feel less misgivings if I was writing it now, I think, because we're more open to revealing that aspect and dimension
Right.
of people. So uh, we sit around, my fellow Phil Ramone acolytes, and we tell the stories. When I went into the studio as a kid, it was, there was no mystery. I mean, he was fearsome. He was feared by everybody who worked in the studio. Everybody knew who he was. It was no secret about the kind of monster that he could be
Wow.
in demanding. The thing about Phil that I would say, as compared to some of the other people that I work with, was that his um what do we want to call it, his craziness, his cruelty, his volatility, generally speaking, it was not capricious. He was aiming towards greatness.
Mm.
He had his elements of what I would call lunacy, but it wasn't just for the sake of being cruel.
Yeah.
He was you know and I think that's the thing about great people like him. He was so driven, and would do anything uh, for that greatness.
Hmm.
Wasn't always perfect, and things didn't always work, and all of that. But he was a great leader in that regard. Everybody, that there's nobody who worked. You may not hear that stuff, and we talk about it, but there's nobody who worked at that studio, I think, that doesn't look at that time in our life as the greatest as the greatest time because we had this, I guess it's like being in the army with General Patton or something. He's a lunatic and he's driving you to beyond your limits, but like you're winning World War II,
We were there.
right? Exactly.
Well, that makes me think of two different things. When I was a student, there were faculty who were of that style of teaching where if you didn't put a ton of fear into the students and threaten them, maybe they were thinking they wouldn't get the best out of them. If you
Right.
made it too easy, they wouldn't excel. But
Right.
I've never been the type of student that benefited from that kind of training. I sort of had that kind of upbringing. So
Right.
I rebelled against it from the very beginning. And
Yes.
I liked the mutual respect thing. But
Yeah.
then there have been students who would say, she lacks the whip, because I'm not threatening to break their legs every day because they're expecting that.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing I don't particularly buy into is the complete sacrifice of
Mm,
a person to get someone else's work accomplished or their art
mm,
done.
yeah.
It's like there might not be enough of you left for the next day if they're completely draining you the day before. And to expect you to do that for years and years and, run yourself to the ground, I balked against that too. So maybe that's why I didn't go through and become a professional recording engineer, besides the fact that I wanted to record my own music.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
do either of those things, I'm sure those both scenarios come up in your work now, working with people, and how do you measure or categorize or shape where love and respect and mutual admiration can come into play, as well as we're serious about this and we want to actually get something accomplished?
Yes. 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 That's such those are such great questions, and I've thought about them a lot. It's kind of an eternal question.
Mm,
What is really necessary? I agree with you. I don't believe that it is necessary, that kind of treatment is necessary to get the best out of people. And I do also agree that there are limits in terms of that it doesn't have to be some incredibly painful experience to make something great. I do believe, though, that how do I say this? The people, I work with a lot of people who are either stuck or want to be creative or limited in their creativity, and generally speaking, it is fear that holds them back. They avoid because they're afraid.
mhm,
And that usually goes to the core out of some kind of negative belief that they have about themselves. But there's
mhm.
also an unwillingness uh, to suffer. There is some suffering, I think, in anything that you pursue that you want to do really well. I don't think it has to be the kind of suffering that you and I are talking about right now. But you have to be willing to sit down and face the blank page and
Yeah,
feel uncomfortable about that,
yeah.
right? And you have to be willing to say, how could this thing be better?
Mm-hmm.
And do it again, even though you don't want to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You have to be willing to do the things that you're afraid of and do the things you don't want to do.
I like the excitement of that, though. I like the blank page. I like the blank recording. I like knowing that in 15 minutes to a couple of hours, there's going to be a finished song that wasn't there before. That just blows me away. I get such a kick out of that. But I didn't realize that that's kind of rare.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And so you found the secret, which is that you're able to project that if I go through this, I will have a finished product on the other end of it,
Mm,
rather than fixating on that moment of discomfort or not knowing or whatever
mm.
it is. So you've got that carrot in front of in front of the horse. So that's the thing that I try to help people to learn.
Oh, that's cool.
That and then of course there's not only the finished product, but when you get into the flow, there's joy in the process itself,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So
I like the work of it. I like doing it.
yeah,
I mean, in a lot of ways, it's like the genie giving you the three wishes. You certainly can ask for infinite wishes, but if you could just turn around and everything you did was instant, it would not be fun anymore. You know, here's
exactly.
another hit record, there's another Grammy, there's another Emmy, here's another finished film. You know, just boom, 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 boom. You just be
Right.
surrounded by stuff, and they'd be like, "Where's the?" I don't know. I don't think we'd say where's the journey, but it's like if you're not in there doing and working it, you feel like you're not doing anything.
Right.
Like a lot of times when you accomplish something and somebody pats you on the back for something that you didn't try for, you don't
Yeah.
even feel like, not that you don't deserve it, but you don't feel like it matters because you didn't work for
Yeah.
it.
Right. Right.
What's
Yeah.
all wrapped up in that?
Right. Well, we know that from a point of view of uh, neuropsychology, that they say that there's so much talk about dopamine right now, and dopamine is the chemical of pursuit. We
Mm,
think of it as the reward chemical, but it's really the thing that keeps the hunter on the veldt for 3 days going after that antelope, right? And they say
anticipation.
that the optimal state is being in pursuit. So it's being in the work, right? And you're trying to solve that musical problem. You hear something in your head, but you haven't figured out how to do it yet, or you get the wrong sound and then you get the right sound, or whatever it is. That flow, that process orientation is really
Mm,
the 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 dopamine is optimized. And
wow.
then you do get a little bump when you finish the thing, but then it goes away. Then it's on to the next thing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But that explains a lot for young musicians who might have family, parents or somebody that are saying, "You're never satisfied. We just bought you that guitar," or "You're never satisfied. You want another amplifier." Like, why can't you just enjoy the one you've got? There is
Yeah,
something to that anticipation and
yeah,
that finding out and exploring, and that's why. So there's actually
yeah,
a neural connection as to why that we are that way. That's
yeah.
fantastic.
Do you know the letter from Martha Graham to Agnes DeMille? Have you
Sounds.
have you seen that?
I
So
no, tell me.
for the audience who doesn't know, so Martha Graham was the inventor of modern dance, really, and Agnes DeMille was a great choreographer who choreographed many of the great Broadway shows in the 40s. And Agnes DeMille was a student of Martha Graham. And Agnes was totally dissatisfied with her work and wrote a letter to Martha Graham saying I stink, basically. And Martha Graham writes back to her and says, it doesn't matter what you think. Your job is to keep the channel open. There's an expression within you. I'm
Yes.
somewhat misquoting or ruining her great letter, but that there is a creative force in you that wouldn't exist in because it's only in you, right?
That's
And so it's
wonderful.
your job to keep the channel open and to let that out and not judge it. And then my favorite line of the letter is she says, there is no satisfaction whatsoever at any time. there there is only a queer dissatisfaction that keeps us striving and makes us that makes us a little better than the others, that
Just
we're
moving forward.
driving towards
Wow.
this thing. And yeah, I think that there is a degree of that kind of suffering for any artist, right? That they're always in pursuit of something that they never can quite completely
Hmm.
grasp. But that's what we're here to do.
That's wild because I wrote a letter like that to Leanne,
You
an
did?
email just a couple of years ago. Just like, so what is the, and how can I? And she's like, you're an artist. It's always going to feel this way. Don't you think I want to still? And I'm like, I thought you were, no, we're all still.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I can also remember hearing that James Taylor voluntarily put himself in an institution, to get some help when he needed it.
really.
And I was really young at the time, and I thought, I love writing songs and playing guitar so much, and I love his music so much. I heard about him when I was 14. I just thought, am I crazy too? I mean, maybe I need to be in a place like that. And then I thought, I think there's a choice, and there's not a this always equals that, or this accompanies this. If you
Mm,
are a musician, then you are nuts, and you are,
mm,
I just thought, no, there's a complete difference. And I think part of the difference for me is there are some people, even harking back to our discussion on Phil, that some people are just disconnected, but they're
yeah,
still artists.
right,
They're
right.
still musicians, they're
Yeah,
unregulated. They're not meeting their own needs,
yeah,
and so they're blaming everybody around them,
yeah,
which is super uncool. How do you, I mean, there's a lot to, uh, I'm sure, the clients you have now, and to almost every student that I have, there's a lot of discussion of where is your brain and what are you doing with this information, and how does it connect to something in there that you already know, so that we can help you move forward. And
yeah,
if that ground, like the soil in their mind, is not ready, I have to help them get ready.
yeah,
I have to teach them how to learn. I have to teach them how to take care of themselves so that they can regulate themselves and move forward. You
yeah.
know? So there is a lot of psychology in teaching.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Uh, so many things to say about that. So one aspect is that I believe a lot of artists and to be creative, or the people who are driven to create, very often have less of a sort of protective coating.
Mm,
They don't have the psychological armor that I or others may have. They feel things more sensitively.
mm-hmm.
And so that allows them to access feelings that perhaps the average person doesn't. And that can also cause suffering. They feel the pain in the world sometimes more than other
Yeah.
people do, or they've gone through things in their own lives that are very painful and that get channeled through their creativity. If they're lucky, they can channel that pain into their art.
Yeah.
Um, and also, uh, I was just in Spain and was so inspired by the art of Salvador Dali and Picasso,
Mm-hmm.
and the architecture of Gaudi, and these people really allowed their imagination full reign, which is so inspiring. Um, at the same time, there's this notion that Freud talked about of cathexis. So cathexis is where our energy flows,
Mm,
the direction that our energy naturally flows in. And so where our where our energy flows, that object towards which it flows becomes super salient. It pops out of the background and becomes the most important thing to us. And everything else kind of recedes into the background.
mm-hmm.
So we could call artists narcissistic or self-absorbed, which, I don't think that's unfair a lot of the time. But but it's understandable in the terms of all of their energy is flowing towards the object of their creation.
Mm,
And so I write about Paul Simon in the book, and write about how difficult he could be, but in a compassionate sense. If I was his assistant and I was running the tape machine, I was just like a thing in the background. I wasn't a person to him. It
mm-hmm.
wasn't because he was necessarily a bad guy. It was just he was so focused on getting that guitar part right,
Right.
that everything else just was very blurry and barely had existence to him. So I think this is a problem with so you look at the work of a Picasso or Gaudi or Dali, they were clearly very cathected to their art. They were incredibly productive. They did, and they had a vision that they were trying to realize. So sometimes they treat people badly, or they treat themselves badly, or they're disconnected from relationship
Mm.
because they're so fixated on that thing that they're creating. So I give artists a pass in that.
speak more to the imagination and attention, because I think where we put our attention is where all that energy starts flowing as well.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, so that imaginative capacity, again, when I work with people, and we all have limits on this, this is an aspect of ourselves that I think we can cultivate. But very often, and you probably experience this with your students as well, is that the limitations come from, in a sense, a lack of imagination.
Mm.
And I think a part of that imagination is the ability to, we can use the cliche of thinking outside the box, but the willingness, and again, I think this is where you can get into some bad behavior. You know, a guy like Picasso or Dali or Gaudy, they broke the rules.
Mm.
You know, if I had the idea of like, you know what, I'm going to do a painting and I'm going to put the nose over here and the eye over there, I would stop myself. I'd say, no, that's a stupid idea. That's embarrassing. I can't, I can't do that. But Picasso allowed himself to do that.
Hmm.
You know, Dali said, I'm going to paint some melting clocks. No, that's a crazy idea. No, he allowed himself to do that.
Hmm.
That's cultivating that. But then that can cross over in terms of, if you're not bound by rules in that way, you might also not be bound by rules in terms of interpersonal relationships.
Yeah. You have a lot of great information on your website, and you take people from, this is where I started, this is why this work is important to me, these are the kinds of people I work with, or I can help you with this, and this. But you end up with love and expecting a good life,
Yeah,
which I believe too. I think it's everybody's birthright to have access to the best of everything,
yeah,
especially a healthy mind,
yeah,
dedicated to a healthy mind. You called it the principle of self-cultivation.
yeah,
Um, I feel like there's so many bad role models out there. You know, like it'd be so much easier if there were more people thinking in this higher way,
yeah,
or shooting for the expectation of the person could be a better person and expecting them to be higher level, better, not you can just pull the rug out from under me and, double cross me because I'm optimistic, like, and we all know that the world is never going to be any different. It's not about getting everybody on the same
yeah.
page, because that's not going to happen anytime soon about anything. There's
Right.
never any consensus. But just that even expectation that there is more good than not.
Yeah.
Does that take a long time to convince some of your clients?
Oh, yeah. It's the way that I'm looking at it now is that, most people come to me because they're stuck in their lives.
Hmm.
And they don't know why, and they don't know how to get out of it. And they tend to, and again, these are sort of hackneyed phrases, but there's that notion of the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset.
Ah,
So
yeah.
fixed mindset is, I am a thing, I am broken, this is who I am, those kinds
Hmm.
of statements. When really we're all human beings in a process of growth and development.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I said that I'm glad that you didn't know me back then, it's because I was an idiot, and I've learned and I've grown over the decades. I hope I'm still not as deluded as I hope I'm a little less deluded today than I was several decades ago. And that is and I think people they don't, the reason that they're stuck is because they never learned how to get unstuck. They never learn that it's a process,
Mm-hmm.
and that information is available, that all these books behind me all give the same basic message. If you penetrate, if you explore, if you learn, you begin to see the patterns. And
Mm.
this is something that can only come through time and effort. But I think unless you get that basic idea of, oh, wait a minute, it's not that I'm broke. I love to use the example of troubleshooting. Right, you and I know how to troubleshoot, right? I see all that equipment behind you, right? So one of the first things you learn in the studio is how to troubleshoot. And what does that mean? If that piece of equipment behind you isn't working, there's a reason for it,
Right.
right? It's not some the
That's the way
universe
it
has
is.
its laws. The universe has its laws. It
Yeah, yeah,
has,
yeah.
oh, did you turn it on? Is it plugged in? Right? Did the battery run out? Right? It's like it is the whatever the and once you learn that process of troubleshooting, right, you find, oh, this is the reason this thing isn't working, and then it works.
Hmm.
There are universal laws of reality. There are laws of nature, right? And if you can understand what those things are, then you can troubleshoot your own life, right? There's a reason why you're stuck, why that machine isn't working. It's not that it's broken, it's you forgot to press the on button,
That's
right?
great.
Right? Or whatever the thing is that you find. So that reconceptualization is it's very hard for people to grasp that fundamental concept. But once you do, um, and then there's I could go. There are other problems that people encounter along the way, but that's really the first piece of it, I think.
Definitely. That's such a great example. I love that. Got to troubleshoot everything. Of
Yeah,
course. Yeah.
right. There's a reason I can figure it out and I can
Yeah.
fix it.
Yeah. How did you learn that though? What got you curious to say, I could make some changes. I could have a great life.
So in my own journey, I had to test the laws of reality. And of course, working in the studio along with all of the wonderful and glorious aspects of it in the 1970s, we were living in the world of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So, uh,
Mhm.
I did a lot of things that were, uh,
Challenging to your physical
maybe
self.
maybe enjoyable in the moment, but led to bad consequences in the long run. It was very hard to make that connection of like, oh, this behavior today, which might feel good in the moment, is going to make me feel really bad about myself permanently, or on a long-term basis.
Yeah.
That's again, where there's something kind of imperfect about the human organism as it exists at this moment, because we're much more attracted to that momentary pleasure
Hmm.
than the long-term consequences.
That's the Jerry Seinfeld thing, right? I'm going to stay up all night and drink with my buddies because I'm evening guy. That's morning guy's problem.
Right.
I'm
Exactly.
evening guy right
Right.
now.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Uh,
Who is morning guy? He's not me. No, that's somebody
Not at the
else.
moment, no.
Right. Right. Hard to remember that in the moment. So having tested that out and then experienced a lot of pain in my life, I got to a point where I said I gotta, um I, there there must be an alternative. There must be a troubleshooting method that I can learn here. There must be an alternative. I don't like pain. I don't want to feel this way.
No.
And I was just relating this story to a client of mine. When I was 37, I had ruined my first marriage. I was working on jingles at that point. And which was a pretty easy job. I was writing and producing and singing. It was a nice, easy way to make money. But I didn't want to have my tombstone read "brainwash small children into buying plastic for a living." I couldn't really square with that as the rest of my life. And I was miserable, and I didn't know, I couldn't see a solution. And it was my birthday, and I was out with some friends, and there was a woman there who had a migraine headache. She was passed out on the table, and she lifted her head and she said, "Go to Ellis Island." And have you ever been to Ellis Island?
Yes.
So you know what that's like. That's the port where all the immigrants came in at the turn of the 20th century, and my grandfather came through there in 1906.
Wow.
So I took it as a sign, and the next day was a beautiful October day, just when my birthday is, and I got on the boat, and children were dancing around me. Something in me broke. I was crying. I felt so lost. And I thought I saw the island of Manhattan the way that my grandfather must have seen it when he came in 1906, and went out to
Hmm.
the island, and I heard Yiddish folk songs that my mother used to sing to me, and went out to the seawall, and the name of all the immigrants are etched on that seawall. And I found my grandfather's name, and I said, Grandpa,
Wow.
what should I do with my life? And like Jewish grandfathers have been saying since the dawn of time, he said, Schmuck, go back to school. Now, at that point, I didn't have one college credit because I started in the studio when I was 17, right out of high school, while I was still in high
Wow.
school, actually.
Right.
And I said, I can't go back to school. I like nice clothes. I don't have the time. I don't have the money. And he said, why do you think I came to this country? He said, I knew I was never going to make it. I came here for the promise of my grandchildren. I came here for you. So don't give me this crap that you don't have the time and the money. Figure it out.
Wow.
So I couldn't argue with that. And I came back to the island of Manhattan, and everything seemed to glow with this sort of cosmic brightness. And that was in October. And by January, I was back in school.
Wow.
And my schooling, I went to this great place called Goddard in Vermont, where you design your own program, no classes, no teachers, um, and my pursuit was answering the question that you asked, right? How what can I learn from this experience that I had of pain, where I tested the laws of reality and learned that if you don't follow them, you experience a lot of pain
Hmm.
and you hurt other people. So what there's got to be a secret here that I can learn. And
Hmm.
started reading all those books, and pursued it on many, many different levels, and then recognized those patterns.
Wow. So was that the beginning then of non-traditional education for you?
The high school I went to was called John Dewey High School, so that was already non-traditional. So I'd always been sort of interested in that way of
Yeah.
learning. I was always an autodidact. And even though I never went to college, I was reading things like Plato and other and actually I was able to, I think, and I'm sorry to say this to an academic, but I was able to enjoy those things because I wasn't in a lot of my peers who went to college and they were exposed to certain things. So, oh, I didn't read that because it was in a college course.
Mm.
Whereas for me, it was I read stuff because I was interested in it.
Yeah. That's funny to be called an academic. I guess as a professor I am, but I still just think of myself as an artist.
Right, right, right.
Uh,
Yeah.
in fact, I've met other professors at other colleges, and when you tell them that you're a professor at Berkeley, they just kind of snarl at you, just like you're not even worthy of
Yeah.
the word.
Right.
That's not your title.
Right. But you
Yeah.
are a professor, which
What
is
kind of things do you remember when you were at Blue Jay training folks? What kind of things were you imparting that you felt were good lessons for recording skills?
yeah. So I would say that the general principle is a standard of excellence,
Hmm.
right? That we are aspiring to a standard of excellence. And that means that the two most, one of the things that that means is that the two most important people in the studio is the person who uh, greets you at the door or picks up the phone, and the person who makes we don't have tape copies anymore, so I feel so old in calling it a tape copy. But in those days, we made tape copies. And the person who makes the tape copy, or the person, what is it, who sends out the MP3 or whatever it is now. Um, because if you don't get those two parts right, whatever happens in the middle is unimportant, right? If you send the person a bad, the wrong mix, or the, you know, the you don't. make them feel comfortable and safe when they walk in the door. If you're the
Mm,
receptionist or you're the assistant who is making that copy at the end of the session, like those are as important as anything. Every element is of equal value and importance, no matter what job you're doing in the studio.
okay.
So if you're setting up the microphone, if you're putting the chair out,
Mm,
if you're turning the lights on, if you're aspiring towards a standard of excellence, all of those things are of great value.
yeah.
So I think that's the and some of my fondest memories are of being that assistant engineer,
Mm,
and um, having the engineer walk in the room. Again, I don't even know what happens in studios anymore, but certainly in my day, the engineer would walk in and everything would be exactly the way they would want it to be. I
mm,
could, if the engineer fell down and died, I could run the session. But
mhm.
having everything be impeccable. So when the artist or the musician walked in the room, I was sitting there drinking my cup of coffee or whatever it was, totally calm because everything was perfect. And so there was no anxiety, no tension, no franticness. And
Mm,
that would set up a situation where it was all about the creativity. It was to try to make the studio, and this was something that was imparted by Phil without question, um, that you would try to make the studio as invisible as possible,
right.
right? Uh, if they picked up the headphone and the headphone didn't work, that you blew it. And of course that would happen,
Yeah.
things would break, things wouldn't work, and
Mm,
technology has improved. But that was the goal, right? The goal was for the person to not even know that they were in the studio.
right. Right. It seems like back in the days of the whole band came in or the whole orchestra came in as
Yeah.
well, it was about capturing broader strokes, much full, already in place sound.
Yeah.
Though your book did talk about piecing together percussion tracks for Phoebe Snow, and
Yeah.
there were things that happened in layers. Not everybody had a band.
Right.
Sometimes people would play all the parts themselves.
Yes.
It still was about capturing beautiful natural sound, whereas now it seems a lot of folks go down rabbit holes with plugins, and they're going into details that you probably didn't even have access to, those
Right.
kinds of parameters
Right.
in the gear that we had in studios in the 70s.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's almost too much.
One of the things that I find very ironic is that people have reached out to me and asked me for details about how we recorded a particular thing because they want to replicate, right? They want to create the plugin that's going to replicate or however they're going to go about it to replicate some sound that was, I don't know, it was, the humidity that day and that thing was broken and I threw up this mic and it was
Exactly.
2:40 in the afternoon and this, you can't replicate this. And that when musicians are playing together, and this is one of the beauties of that, is that I think one of the things that gets lost in what you're talking about is the mistake, right? Is the fortuitous thing that you didn't plan for.
Mm,
And sometimes you're in the studio with a band and you do take after take, and then something happens on take 7 or 12 or whatever it is, where suddenly like everything locks together,
yes.
like the tuning, like somebody goes a little bit out of tune, but then suddenly the sound just expands, or they
Yes.
hit a groove that's like, and how do you measure that on a computer screen? Like what's exact, and then you've created, something has emerged out of the process that there's no possibility of emerging when everything is just everything's replicated identically every time that thing runs on your computer. So and then of course even in the 70s there was as multi-track recording became more and more the way that we did things, that people would fall into the trap of scrutinizing an insignificant detail and losing the general feel. And that was always
Mm.
the greater artists would um always keep an awareness. It's the dual awareness of, okay, we want to get this part right, but how does it fit into the whole?
Mm.
Paul Simon would say, um, that sounds like an overdub. That doesn't work because it sounds like it's
Yeah,
not integral to the thing. It doesn't
right,
feel like it's part of the whole.
right.
Well, and there were times when he said, he lost it, right? He'd go back and listen to the original demo and say, oh, that had something that I went down this rabbit hole, and then we lost that original feel. So even the great artists like that could get caught in that scrutiny and lose the feel.
And he was one of the first I heard say that when we like a song on a band, what we're also liking is the sound of the record,
Right.
and
Yeah.
we fall in love with that sound.
Yeah.
I like his song Cecilia. It's got a great sound. I
Right.
mean, the record's got a great sound, but that whole album's still crazy after all these years. It's an impeccably beautiful recorded album. It's
Yeah.
like everything you guys were working on then, and then what he did after, just beautiful sound. I
Yeah.
remember hearing a mono version of the Beatles tune "She's a Woman,"
Uh-huh.
where Capitol put the whole mono record on one side of the stereo spectrum and then just reverb of the whole record on the other side. And I just thought it was the most horrible thing I'd ever heard. And I
Yeah.
just thought, when I was a little kid,
Yeah.
'cause that was like around, what, 66, I just thought,
Sure.
I don't like this song. It
Right.
was like the sound of the record was actually hurting my ears. I
Yeah.
don't like
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
song.
Yeah.
But then when the stereo version came out, I went, oh, the song's fantastic. It was
Right.
just a terrible idea to put reverb of the equal volume of the whole mono record on the other side. It's like, what are you thinking?
Really.
My
That's
God.
Yeah, yeah. I that probably is part of the reason that you and I were interested in recording, right? Because
Yeah.
one of the first records that I remember, I had a brother who was older than me, and he brought the single home, and we put it on, and it was a quarter to three by Gary U.S. Bonds, and it just had this sound, like it sounded to me like it was recorded in a schoolyard, and it was so evocative. It was I was in a place, and
Yeah.
and and
Soundscape.
and that really triggered my imagination. I just saw these, and I was like, I want to do that. Like, I want to make one of those. And
Mm.
yeah, that was a big part of what made that song sound me liking the song,
Definitely.
as you say, that was a part of it.
It was a giant part of the curiosity of the Beatles, too, because they'd be like, let's make one of them because that
Right,
sounds really cool.
right, right.
I remember that other tune was on, people used to adopt it for the sports games and stuff, but they're like rock and roll music part one or something. What was it,
Uh,
part two? Hey!
right, right,
Even all the
right,
it's like, that is cool stuff.
right.
Let's
And
put
could
some
move
crazy,
50,000 people.
yeah, let's put crazy sounds in. That sounds great.
Right.
Now you have apps and children's books too. Tell me about Shrinky.
So I was working with a client who struggled with obsessive compulsive disorder with OCD, and we
Hmm.
would do a protocol in the studio, in the therapy room, and he would feel better, but he would forget to do it on his own. He said, I wish I could put you in my ear when I'm
Ah,
struggling with this thing. So I decided that I would make an app so he could
nice.
utilize that protocol um, when I wasn't around. And I
Great
think
idea.
it's an effective It's an effective technique. We get caught in very often with anxiety. Uh, Anxiety will attach itself to an object. Some people are afraid of the airplane, some people are afraid of the elevator, some people are
Hmm.
afraid to sit down in front of their piano. Some, people are afraid, and it's
Hmm.
what they do is they think the problem is in the object, right? It's in
Ah.
the airplane, it's in the elevator, it's in the crowd
Hmm.
of people or whatever it is.
It's in
And
your thought.
so what I turn that so I say that is a signal. Yeah.
So then you have
So
protocols to work with the anxiety.
yeah, and that's what I use that's what the app does. It just takes people through those steps to reduce their anxiety and get
That's
the
awesome.
obsessive thing out of their head.
Fantastic.
But it's something that you have to practice
Right.
on a regular basis, because the habit of thought and the habit of feeling is very, very deeply ingrained.
Hmm.
And so it's a deeply dug groove in our neurochemistry, and so the marble is going to
Yeah,
tend to run down that groove.
absolutely.
So in order to create a new groove, you got to practice it a lot.
Yeah,
And as you
definitely.
know, with music,
Yeah.
it's all about practice.
And building that groove, building that
Right.
synapse connection.
Exactly.
Do you also work with them with EFT, the emotional freedom technique?
I don't know that one.
It's the one that's all the tapping.
Oh, the tapping, right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't do the tapping stuff. I also am trained in EMDR, which is a technique for trauma, uh, for healing trauma
Oh, good.
that involves bilateral stimulation, um, and that can be very effective.
Nice. What about the RAS, the reticular activating system?
Oh,
Sounds like,
you know a lot of these things. Do you
yeah,
practice this stuff?
I like brain training. I
You
like a
do.
lot of the books and the folks that have got a lot of good things to say, and that movie, What the Bleep Do We Know? And there's a lot of cool stuff out there. And
Yeah.
I like that there's so much science behind it and good people behind it, that they're not out just to manipulate more people. They're actually teaching us how to, like you say, have a growth mindset and get better at all these things.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. There are a lot of great psychotechnologies
Hmm.
out there, and I think they all have a value. Um, I I I've come to believe over time that you know Charlie Munger.
No.
So Charlie Munger is the guy, his partner with Warren Buffett, and Charlie is like 102 years old or something now, and he's a multi-billionaire, so he's the sage of the day.
Right.
And one of the things that Charlie says that I like, one of his insights, is anytime there's a large effect, there are multiple causes.
Hmm.
So we tend to live in a mindset of the sort of the bacteria theory. It's like, oh, I have this bacteria, I'm going to take an antibiotic and it's going to cure me. Whereas I see things as more complex than that. So I kind of take an all of the above approach,
Oh, cool.
because there are multiple factors that contribute to whatever it is that you're struggling with. And so I think all the techniques are great, but none of them are none of they're all they may all be necessary, but they're not sufficient, and that you kind of have to approach a problem from many many different
Right.
perspectives and angles and heuristics. And really, if I was going to say what's the one thing, it's what I was just saying about practice. It's about what it's called in Sanskrit, the bhakti marga, which is the path of devotion.
Hmm.
There are many ways to learn how to play the guitar, but the most important thing is to work on whatever method you're working on,
Yeah.
right?
I
And
love it.
and there are many
Definitely.
different teachers,
Right.
but it's uh, learning everything you can from that teacher
Jumping in with your whole self.
with your whole self, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Did you know when you first started getting into recording that you were going to love it as much as you did?
Um, well, I had the revelation at 14 that it was what I wanted to do.
Mm.
So I was lucky in that regard, and I mentioned it to my mother, and she was a bit of a backstage mom, and she got me an internship. Like 2 days later, when I mentioned that, I think I was 16 probably, and I interned at this jingle house that was run by this amazing woman, Susan Hamilton, who's unfortunately passed away, and she did most of her work at A&R Studios, and so she got me the internship at A&R, and then I got the job there as the schlepper. And I was not, even though I had this passion, I had a tape recorder at home, and that I played around with, something you mentioned before. I didn't have any kind of concept of um, that recording could be and should be about getting this beautiful quality. I thought of it more like, oh, Jimi Hendrix or the Beatles, you make weird sounds and you do kooky things. And it wasn't about the thing that you were talking about of making a record sound beautiful.
Hmm.
Um, um, and so that was a very different concept that was central to Phil Ramone's thing and A&R Studios. And so that I found that that really um, was something that I learned, that I was very attracted to.
He wanted to make him beautiful.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Like that was what was important. Like, and but then I actually discovered that there were many things about it that I didn't love so much. What I
Like,
loved were the people. What I
mm,
loved were the musicians. What I loved were the arrangers. What I loved
mm,
was the producers. What I loved were the artists. I loved walking into a room and there being 40, an orchestra of 40 musicians,
mm.
and the conductor getting up on the podium and raising, his stick and hitting that downbeat and this incredible sound coming out,
Yeah.
and those were the things that I really loved. It was more about the people, than the actual technology. It turns out that's why I'm a therapist today, because I was my friends who are recording engineers, they're far more into the technology than I was.
Yeah.
And in fact, the technology kind of drove me crazy because it was always breaking.
Sure.
We were always pushing the edge of the new technology and trying to figure that out, and that kind of drove me nuts. And then through the years, as things became more technological, and I was just sitting in the room with one person with a laptop,
Hmm.
that was less compelling to me.
Definitely. I could.
And the kind of scrutiny that you're talking about, I was working with a friend, and she was working on the spaces between the songs, and we had it up in Pro Tools,
Hmm.
primitive Pro Tools, and we were like moving one, millisecond back and forth. And it's like, yeah, I can't do this anymore.
I think that's
So
why.
so I love, I did this the book release party that I did 5 or 6 years ago. I did a reunion of the studio cats that I worked with in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s.
Oh, great.
And nobody had ever really done that before. And we did it at a place called the Cutting Room in the city. And I asked my friend Robbie Condor, who's a great keyboard player and arranger, if he would be the musical director. And before I didn't even know if this thing was going to come off. And before I knew it, we had over 50 musicians and singers just volunteering to do this. I did it as a benefit for Music Cares,
Oh, nice.
and everybody wanted to participate.
Nice.
And it ended up being a sold out event and standing room only. And it was an extraordinary night. And,
Awesome.
Paul Schaefer brought his World's Most Dangerous Band, and Valerie Simpson sang "Ain't No Mountain High Enough," and uh,
Wow.
so it was a great night. But my favorite part was during the rehearsal. I got to hang with
Yeah.
my old friends, and each one of these characters, each one of these studio cats, the unsung heroes, the people that nobody knows the names of necessarily,
Right.
whether it was Kenny Asher or Dave Spinoza or Chris Parker or and just I would sit with each one of them for a couple of minutes, and we'd hang out, and that was the part that I liked the best. I mean, the night was amazing. The music was incredible, but it was I wrote the book. My one of my overall intentions was to celebrate those folks,
Yeah.
to celebrate the people behind. Not, everybody wanted to read about the artists, so I had to put that on the cover, right? That's what was going to sell the book. Bob Dylan, Mick Jagger, Frank Sinatra, but
Ah,
but the people that I cared about the most and that I really wanted to celebrate in the book, and the reason that I put on that party were the studio cats, because those folks didn't have an ego. They weren't cruel or mean or whatever, narcissistic. They you couldn't be. If you were a studio musician, you had to be
yeah.
willing to do whatever it took.
Yeah.
And they to me, um, those were really the people that I cherished, that I worked with through the years. And uh, if I could just hang out with them, I would, I would do that. But the technological part of recording, um, that's for somebody else now.
Yeah. The real connections. That's where it's all about. I
That's
mean,
right.
that's why this whole thing started for me. It's like I
Really.
have equipment. I certainly have a lot of ideas. I can make music till the cows come home, but
Mm.
I don't often get a chance to talk to other creative people on a deeper level,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
need that company.
Yes. 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 Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. And I'm fortunate that I get to work as a therapist with some really terrific artists.
Mm,
And I get and again, that's what I'd rather do, so that's what I do, right? I don't need to hang out with them
makes sense.
in the studio, but I get to hang out with them when they're at their realist, and that's a lot of fun.
Because it'd be like you were at a family reunion. You don't even get a chance to have a deep conversation with anybody. You're just doing all the peripheral stuff,
Right,
and
right,
this whole party thing is happening.
right.
Kind of like a session. Okay, great. The session is happening. We got some good songs done. That's great. But I didn't really get to talk to so and so the way I wanted to.
Yes,
You
yes.
get to do that now with your work.
And that's another regret that I have, looking back, in terms of just the naivety that you have in youth, is that so many of these individuals that I got to work with, studio musicians, arrangers, they all had stories.
Hmm.
They all had done incredible things, and I never really asked.
Hmm.
Oh, you were Bobby Darin's musical arranger. I didn't know that. What was it like to do that, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
um, you were the orchestrator for West Side Story. Oh, that's interesting. Wish I
Yeah.
would have. Now we have so much access to information with the internet, right? You could Google everything and find out stuff. Then
Right.
you didn't have that access. But I wish that I would have taken the time to
Mm-hmm.
sit down with these folks and gotten into some of those deeper conversations. So,
That makes
you know,
sense.
I try to do it now.
That's so good. Before we go, tell me about the children's books.
I just I have two kids. My daughter is 20 now. My son is 17, and uh, my
Wow.
you sit down with your kid, and they'd ask for a story, and So I would make up a story, and then I decided to. I think probably you understand as a creative person, um, I let me put it this way to not answer your question. When I wrote the book, I was thinking musically and I was thinking cinematically.
Oh, cool.
So I think one of the things that people say about the book is, "Oh wow, it's so vivid. I could really see that." Right?
Mm,
And it was because I was seeing it,
yeah,
right? Or I was thinking, rhythmically. I mean, I even called the chapters tracks,
right.
right? And so where does one art end and the next one begin? So whatever the impulse, and maybe that's just my crazy creativity. I don't think I'm necessarily the greatest at any of them, but if I had an impulse to do, I had a vision for a children's book, so I made it, and I found an old friend who I thought was a spectacular illustrator,
Mm,
and asked her if she wanted to. Somebody I was in kindergarten with,
that's
uh,
awesome.
and I asked her if she wanted to do it with me, and we did it together. And
That's
you know,
beautiful.
it was just a fun thing to do, and it didn't. I didn't find a publisher. I published it myself. It didn't sell anything, but I think I like it, and again, I think as an artist, that's kind of what you do.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of times of myself as like a painter. I just love
Yeah,
painting with sound. And it's not about selling paintings, it's not about reproducing them live for people everywhere. I really just like sometimes being the whole band myself, playing and
yeah,
singing all the parts, doing all the arranging and producing. And I get such a kick out of that. That's the best part, you
so
know?
much fun.
Even
Yeah,
Paul McCartney talks about, like, I like writing the songs and recording the songs, but it's like a carpenter who all of a sudden has to go out talking about how he likes to make chairs, but really he just wants to be back at the shop making the chairs, you know?
right, right, right. Sure.
So, anything that you're working on currently or looking forward to working on, more books or more studies
Yeah,
in your current fields?
yeah. So what I'm working on right now actually is an online course.
Beautiful.
At my age, I think it's time, and who knows how much more time I actually have to. I think as we get older and develop wisdom, it really is about perceiving patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have a construction and a vision of the way this whole thing works, what those some of those universal laws of reality are, what human nature is about, how to get unstuck, how to live your best life. And I want to be able to, I want to offer that to people in a format that they can understand, that they can have access to in our YouTube world,
Mm-hmm.
and to provide them with an ability to learn those things in a way that is less expensive than ongoing weekly therapy. So I can reach more people that way, where they can get a lot of value. The thing is that in therapy, most people come in and they do a lot of talking, and they need to be heard, and that is of value. And there's a healing in being heard, but I don't think it ultimately is enough. And maybe there's 5 minutes in every session where I'm actually able to teach them something that might help them advance in their life project. So I want to create something where, if you want to come to me for individual therapy and talk most of the time, I'm happy to do that, and I'm happy to take your money. But if I can, put like 5 or 10 years of therapy in a couple of hours.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to give that value to people if they want to have access to it. So that's what I'm working on now, and of course,
That
it
sounds
becomes
great.
a creative project. So it's going to take longer than it's going to take a little time,
You'll
given
have to
the limit.
troubleshoot
I
it.
got to trouble. Yeah, and I'm busy. I have a full practice. I've got a family, but I'm always, I need, just the way you're talking about. You want to go back and make the chair, right? There's something addictive or compelling about the creative process that I always need to be working
Yeah.
on something,
I think
because
it's
it's got to
because,
feed that part of my soul.
yes. I think it's because we're playing with the same energy that created the world, you know? It's like
Absolutely.
it's your connection to all that is, and if you get to play with that magic, or like a friend of mine, Dr. Kate Chadbourne always says, it's like the universe is full of magic, that the idea is just to remember to use it, you know? To
Absolutely. That's
lean back
exactly
into
what
that.
my course is about.
There
That's
you
it.
go. There you
Right.
go. Yeah, I love
You-
that. That's the best stuff.
Yeah. Do you know the concept of I know we have to stop. I have to stop in a minute, but the concept of morphological resonance.
No,
So in this idea, how thoughts are not generated in our brain, but our brain is a receiver, right?
makes
And
sense.
this is a creative person, right? That where did that song come from, right?
Hmm.
If you're lucky, you are a channel, and you've tuned the receiver well
Hmm.
enough that that thing can then move through you.
Yes.
You're the speaker, the speaker on the radio or whatever, and you get it to put it down. And it's an interesting concept to think that that's really it's about tuning the instrument so you
Mm,
can receive the magic,
yes.
right? And that's the acceptance and the alignment with,
Great word.
we have this ego thing that we're separate from the all,
Yeah.
but that's an illusion.
No.
And if you can, and we resist, because we think that we're going to lose some kind of autonomy if
Right.
we come into harmony with that universal energy. But
I don't
that's
want to be
not
a robot. Like
right.
people get all stiff about it. Yeah.
They get all stiff about it. But if you're willing to accept it and embrace it, then you actually find freedom.
Yes. I think when you're feeling your best and you're on top of the world and you're most aligned and connected and tuned properly, that's when you really are your real self. Everything
Exactly.
else is watered down, disrupted, disconnected, upset version. And
Exactly.
it's very
Exactly.
hard to create from there. I mean, you can write sad songs or angry songs, but
Right.
uh, you could still have something to say even when you're feeling
Right.
good about
Right.
something that's going wrong, but you don't
Right.
have to physically feel bad about it. And I think what some people or misunderstand, and what I was misunderstanding for a while, was, why would the universe care whether I was happy or not? Like, who the heck
Right.
cares if I'm happy? But you
Right.
don't realize that your energy is always receiving more energy, and you're always putting out energy, and things are going
Yes.
to always spiral either down or up depending upon what your vibration is. So it's
Yes.
so important to tune yourself, because you're only going to keep getting more of the same of what you're thinking and acting upon and talking
Right.
about all the time. And like you say, the grooves, you're going to get
Right.
stuck in those. I actually said that to a class one time when I was feeling really bad. I said, choose your ruts carefully, because you're going to be in them for a while.
Right.
I'm like, whoa, what did you just say? That's pretty good.
Right. Right. You were channeling at that moment. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you
Yeah.
can just feel that some beautiful thing comes through and you go,
Right.
that was a gift.
Right. Who said that?
Yeah, yeah. Or if something terrible floats by my brain, I think that wasn't even my thought. I just let that keep going
Right.
because
Right.
it was almost smelly. Like,
Right.
I'm not going to repeat that. That's awful.
Right. Right.
I didn't think of that.
Let that one go. That wasn't me. Who did that?
But there's that, like you say, self-permission, self-awareness, understanding, self-regulation, the ability to know that you have a choice. Like, so often,
Right.
even if I wanted to right now, I could be out here watching us have a conversation.
Right.
Some people are just here and they're in
Right.
pain and can't be anywhere else.
That's right. That's right.
That, that,
And that's where most of the people that I work with that you could see that they're spellbound.
hmm,
Yeah. That they just go into their story and they stay in their story. As my mother called it, everybody has their shtick,
Their
right?
shtick.
And they don't recognize how they're caught in that spell. And
Mm,
that's, that's the psychotechnologies that you're talking about, or, how do you get somebody, how do you help somebody
mm.
recognize that they're caught in a spell and to step outside of it?
Because if it's bad, if it's feeling terrible, it's a trap. It's not even
Yeah,
where you're supposed to be. Like you're stuck in a
right,
net somewhere and you
right,
have the option to get out. Do you
right,
care to learn how to get out? That is
right.
your option.
That's right.
Either
That's right.
stay miserable or do something about it, you know?
Indeed. Indeed.
Yeah.
And that you can do something about it. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people don't
So
believe that. Yeah.
this has been wonderful, so enjoyable, so much fun. I hope that it works for you.
Thank you. This has been really cool. I just loved your book so much, Glenn. I
Thank you
couldn't wait
so
to meet
much.
you. And I just
Thank
think
you.
you're awesome and I love the work you're doing. So thank you on behalf of artists everywhere.
And this is really the ultimate, the joy of the book is that it gave me access to meet people like you, to have these kinds of conversations. This is this is so it's this is what's so great.
Yeah, it's fantastic that you followed through with the even first thought of maybe I could write a book. Because if you hadn't, I would have missed out on absolute pleasure I had reading it. So, well, listening to it, I was listening on Audible.
Thank thank you so much. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate that. That means a lot to me. And please say hello to all of my friends at Berkeley.
I will. I will. That's so great. And thank you for everything that you did for recording as well. I mean, you were part of so many fantastic projects and uh, recordings and movie soundtracks and things we didn't get to even mention. And that matters a lot. And then hearing that Rob was mentored by you, that was wonderful. I was like, what did he teach you? Because I always wanted to study with Phil. What would he have taught me? You know?
Right. Rob is he's a great guy, and I'm glad that, and he's carrying the legacy forward.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's really a wonderful person. So yeah, let's do it again sometime.
Sure.
This was
Thank
fun.
you. That'd be great. Sounds
All right.
great. Thank
All
you
right.
so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Lauren. We'll talk
Be well,
soon.
Glenn. Ciao.
Bye bye. Ciao.